It is a distinct pleasure to be here today once again at St. Charles Avenue Church and to greet you on behalf of Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. St. Charles has been a steady and sturdy friend of Austin Seminary, sending us such good students and such good trustees in more recent years in Don Frampton and Walter Harris, and showing us such generosity in so many ways. We're building now our second of two new four-story apartment buildings. In fact, the second building is now coming out of the ground as I speak. It'll be ready for the fall semester in 2017. And St. Charles Avenue Church has been such a partner with us in that effort. Your gift of $50,000 toward that effort will result in an apartment that will bear a plaque to the right of the entrance door to the apartment with your name on it. And when we actually get around to dedicating that building, I hope that we can get Don or others, certainly Walter, to come and represent you as we dedicate that building. That's just one little token of the ways in which this church matters to not just our seminary, but to the whole communion. What a great church you are. What a wonderful, lively, joyful church you are. And on behalf of Austin Seminary and Presbyterians everywhere, I'm grateful to you, and I'm doubly grateful to be here today. I'm reading today from the Gospel of Mark, the 10th chapter, beginning to read at the 35th verse. Listen for the word of God. James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And he said to them, "Well, what is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. For whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'm thinking this morning about service. It's the obvious thing for you to be thinking about on this day when we each have roles to play in setting apart Sarah Chancellor Watson for service as one of your ordained ministers of word and sacrament. Service is a word that just comes to mind naturally today. And for many of us, just noting the date, September 11th, and thinking back 15 years when 9/11 began to mean something very different for us, the word service leaps up again, I think. Kay and I were in New York at the beginning of the summer visiting our younger daughter there, and we went to the newly opened 9/11 Museum, right there in the very spot where one of the buildings of the World Trade Center used to stand. There was so much in that museum to jog the memory of that terrible day. Mangled fire trucks and mangled ambulances, the photographs of all of those workers in those buildings who lost their lives that day. And one particular exhibit that just left me speechless. You could pick up a phone and hear the dozens and dozens of voicemail messages left on one particular New York City fireman's home phone across a 24-hour period. Early on that Tuesday morning, as the news of the event began fanning out, the voicemail messages were more cheerful. "Hey, Frank, I know you're probably at the scene doing your job as a fireman, and I want you to call me back when you get home. Tell me about what it's like there on the ground." messages from buddies, from parents, from school chums, and from a girlfriend. But over the course of the day, one message after another, and the messages got desperate. Frankie, this is the third time I've called you, darling. All of us are worried about you. I haven't heard from you. Please, for the love of God, call me back. I love you. He wouldn't be calling back. He and so many others gave their lives serving. This past Thursday at Austin Seminary, I had my annual lunch with the 12 full-ride fellowship recipients coming into the seminary this year in the entering class. These are the students who, because of their academic talents and gifts for leadership, have earned one of 12 or more merit fellowships given out every year, by which they come as students with their tuition, housing, books, and living expenses paid for. We have a luncheon for them every year, and we tell them a bit about the various individuals who have funded these fellowships. And then we ask them to go around the table and to talk a bit, each one of them, about why they came to the seminary. One young woman from Boston said, "I came here to prepare for a servant ministry that will help me do the most good I possibly can in the world." And there was something about her eagerness and earnestness that caught my attention. Even in the field of ministry, I don't hear that kind of earnestness just all the time. Sometimes what I hear is, I want to go to a big church. I want to be the pastor of power people. In the Gospel of Mark, James and John, two brothers and also disciples of Jesus, say to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Jesus says, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And their answer, taken straight out of table imagery, banquet seating, head table imagery, was, "Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory." And by the way, in Matthew's version of this same story, it is their mother who makes this request, and some scholars suggest that Matthew wrote her into the story in order to protect those two disciples' reputations. But whoever asked the question, Jesus gave this answer: "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink?" The cup he's talking about stands for all the suffering of the passion, and for the suffering and the death of Jesus, and what's more, for the suffering of all the world, back and forth through time. Are you able to drink that cup? He asked them. There are so many people in this congregation right now who have drunk that cup, who are drinking it now, and you know how hard that is. One Thanksgiving, back when George W. Bush was president, my family and I spent a week together in Paris. Our daughter was already there. She was spending some time abroad in Paris while she was in college, and her sister and Kay and I were there visiting. We went all over Paris. We saw the museums, we saw the restaurants, we saw the points of interest. We went everywhere, to the Louvre, to Versailles, to Montmartre, to the Eiffel Tower, the Notre Dame Cathedral, and the two ice cream shops that everybody in the world brags about. But the most moving experience I had that week, Thanksgiving week, was being in church on that Thanksgiving day. We went to the American Cathedral there, an Episcopal church for American expatriates there in Paris, and I loved the liturgy and the words of the hymns and the privilege of having one daughter sitting on my right and the other daughter sitting on my left. But here's what moved me most of all. During the announcements, the dean of the cathedral invited a man to come forward. He was sitting on the front row, invited the man to come forward and read the Thanksgiving Day proclamation from the lectern that had been issued that year by President Bush. The man rose from the first pew. He walked up to the lectern, obviously a member of that congregation, a regular there. He seemed to me a bit frumpily dressed, his pants needing to be pressed, his hair needing to be combed, but that was okay. He began reading the proclamation. And when he got to the part about calling for prayer for our troops in harm's way, he lost his composure. Who wouldn't have? He was clearly moved by those particular words, and he had to take a moment. It took some time for him to regain his composure, and I figured out during the rest of that proclamation that that man was Craig Stapleton, the United States ambassador to France. What moved me so about that was the human side of government. Not so much the imperial stuff, the trappings and the triumphalism of power, not the political stuff, the highly charged arguments about who's right and who's wrong about this or that. None of that. The man at the lectern was positively what I don't think about when I think about preening power. No, he was there instead, in need of a dry cleaner and a haircut, and losing his composure at the thoroughly human thought of troops in harm's way and the vulnerability of life, and maybe the spouses and children and parents who still grieve for spouses and parents and children lost in this or that conflict around the world. And then there in the chancel, before he returned to his seat, he bowed to the cross and paid homage to a power greater than any other power in the world. Later at communion, he was ahead of me in line, and I saw him receive the host and drink deeply from the cup. Are you able to drink from the cup that I drink? Said Jesus to James and to John, preening there in their own self-importance. There's a great book of black and white photographs that I have in my office in Austin, taken by journalists from the 60s who chronicle the civil rights movement. And my favorite photograph, taken in some American city, I don't know which, maybe Chicago, maybe Detroit, was a picture of the front line of people leading a march, arms linked together. These people in that front line were Martin Luther King Jr., Coretta Scott King, and a line of other marchers, other leaders, and behind them, throngs of others. It appears that the picture was taken a second or so after a loud noise coming from somewhere nearby. Was it a firecracker? Was it a gunshot? Was it a car slamming into a building? Was it something hitting a sidewalk after being thrown from a window? We don't know. What you see in the picture is that every soul in that front line is looking urgently toward where the sound might be coming from. Everyone, that is, except King himself. While the rest of them are distracted, he stares resolutely straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, his face set toward Jerusalem. And that appears to be all that matters to him. Are you able to drink from the cup that I drink? I had this privilege of studying this very text once in a small group setting with Fred Craddock, the late New Testament professor and preacher, professor of preaching, who from the seminary at Emory University taught generations of seminary students to be preachers. We were all going around the table, we preachers, preening for each other because we were all legends in our own minds, making gaseously profound observations about the text. And finally, this great man, Craddock, who had clearly been amused watching all of the pontification, opened his mouth and asked us, "If I ask you to do something for me, would you do it?" He was thinking about the question that James and John had asked. We sat there quietly, and he spoke again. Sometimes people say more than what they say and mean more than what they mean. We hear, "Are you able to drink from the cup?" when we're 17, and we say, "Yes." But we have in mind something great. That's easier by far than the dribbling on and on of commitment. We sat there just marinating in that wisdom, and Fred spoke up again. "But to drink the cup in one swallow," he said, "is far easier than sipping on it for 40 years. The dribbling on and on of commitment, he said. He was thinking surely about the 40 years of ministry that you are likely to have, Sarah, some of those years here. To drink the cup in one swallow, Craddock said, is far easier than sipping on it for 40 years. No dramatic event, no chance for photographers to come and take a picture of the moment. No, not that. Instead, you go to bed, you get up, you support your family, you visit the hospital, you comfort people in trouble, you baptize and marry and bury and grow the pension fund. You don't write one big check. You write a succession of little checks all through your life, and sometimes we feel left out because there was a time, we think, when ministry was more exciting and lightning was flashing all around. We feel off the track somehow. The big stuff isn't happening. The glory days are no more. Sometimes as a seminary president, I get phone calls from search committees looking for pastors, and I get phone calls from pastors looking for search committees. They've been in their first church, and now they're ready to move, and I'll say, what are you looking for? And what I mean by that question is, what do you think your vocation is leading you toward? Pastoral care, social justice ministries, the vocation of preaching, the vocation of serving the poor, what? And sometimes the answer will come back, oh, nothing smaller than 1,500 members, preferably a budget of 7 figures, something like that. I'll mention a church in a small county seat town, a good church with good people, and I'll say these people need a pastor, and over the phone, sometimes what I hear is laughter. No, thank you. Been there, done that. It's James and John all over again. As if service to the church, as if anything worth doing is always about lightning flashing around. But more often than that, it's not that at all. Not the churchy version of American Idol. Not always what we want. Just the day-to-day in and out of being prosaically faithful. I think what he was saying about James and John was that they were vying for front row seats when the big stuff started happening again. When the photographer showed up again, when the glory days came back, when the march down St. Charles Avenue was about to begin again, and until that happened, they would just sit out the part about the cup and the baptism into the life and death of Christ and the whole business about doing the most good you possibly can in the world. The dribbling on of commitment is what Craddock called it. The day in and day out of being prosaically faithful. But we'd like more than that. Honestly, sometimes I'd like more than that. Something more than just being prosaically faithful. I'm preaching a sermon somewhere, and a little girl waits in line afterward to hand me something she drew on her bulletin about a story I told, and she's hoping I'll take it home and put it in my refrigerator. And there are times when I can't acknowledge the privilege of receiving that amazing gesture because I want more than that. Somebody from out in the hinterlands emails me and asks me if I'll read his sermon for next Sunday and help him make it better, and I want more than that. A spontaneous conversation in the hallway, and the next day a staff person writes me a note that says, "Thank you, you really helped me yesterday, and God help me, sometimes I want more than that. I want more, God help me, than those occasional conversations about the faith that I get to have with my children. I want at least 15 minutes of fame." I wish you all could hear the invocation I've already written for the upcoming presidential inaugural in the event that either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton invites me to do it. It's a beauty of a prayer. I want the photographers, I want the glory days, I want people taking notes on what I'm saying from the pulpit. I want CNN saying, "And now, Dr. Wardlaw." But what Jesus offers us instead, and swears to us that it's worth it, is 40 years of sipping from the cup. 40 years, Sarah, of living into your baptismal identity. 40 years of the dribbling on and on of commitment to the glory of God. Or maybe, if we're really lucky, more than 40 years. In the name of God, Creator, Christ, and Holy Spirit, amen.